Hey, what's good, everybody? I'd like to welcome you all back to the Boombox Guru channel. I'm your host, LB. So, today we're going to do an album review, but this was going to be a little bit different. I'm going to actually, for the first time, be reviewing one of my favorite soundtracks, hip hop soundtracks, to come out in the 90s. If anybody like me that grew up in the 90s, you probably remember back then that hip hop soundtracks were really important. They were just as important as when your favorite hip hop artist put out an album. And a lot of those hip hop soundtracks, they were well coordinated and put together. They had a lot of the hottest and best artists that were out during that time. The Boys in the Hood soundtrack, Minister Society, New Jack City, uh, Juice. A lot of great soundtracks came out back in that decade. One of my favorite ones that came out was Murder Was the Case, released in 1994. Snoop Doggy Dogg, Death Row Records, and this is actually a first pressing too. This is an original first pressing as well. So this was one of my favorite soundtracks. I actually used to own the reissue, the digitally remastered version that came out in the early 2000s, but I don't even know what happened to it. I don't know what happened to the CD. I don't know what happened to the case or the cover or anything. So I decided to go ahead and repurchase this album, and I went ahead and sought out the original pressing because what's better than the original? But man, yeah, this soundtrack, man, 1994, just like Tupac, just like I said in the Tupac video I did, 1994 was also a very pivotal year for Snoop Dogg. Around this time, Snoop, he was fighting a high profile murder case. Some of you may not be old enough to remember that, but yeah, but Snoop actually, there was a time where Snoop Dogg's career and his freedom was up in the balance. He actually had caught a serious charge back in the early 90s, right at the height of his career, like the early stages of his career. I mean, he was huge, but he only had one album out at that time, and around that same time, man, he was fighting a high profile murder case, and at one point it looked like Snoop might what was gonna go down for it. But as we know today, of course, because Snoop is the biggest rapper of all time worldwide, that didn't happen. He was acquitted. But back in 1994, man, it was a real scary time for him. I'm pretty sure. But in the midst of all of that, Snoop was still managing to continue to amass a lot of success. I mean, Death Row Records continued to amass a lot of success. They were continuing to grow and become a huge dominant force within the music industry, particularly the hip hop industry. Death Row Records, even though their tenure was short lived, they did dominate for a long time, and even today they're considered one of the greatest hip hop labels of all time. And even back then, at this time in 1994, they were the you could argue that they were the biggest hip hop label out at that time. I mean, they was crushing everybody. They was crushing everybody. Of course, Bad Boy would emerge and be some worthy competition, but still, you know, Death Row and Bad Boy was neck and neck at one point, especially around this era. But in the midst of the murder trial and everything, Death Row Records CEO Suge Knight, he came up with an idea of Snoop creating a short film based around one of his most popular songs from his debut album, Doggystyle. If you don't know, Murder Was the Case originally appeared on Snoop's first album, Doggystyle. So Dr. Dre, he actually directed this short film, and he was also the coordinator of the soundtrack as well. And I gotta tell you, man, this soundtrack is one of the best soundtracks ever. One of the best soundtracks of the '90s. I mean, the plethora of talent that was included on here. I mean, you got a lot of. It was an opportunity for a lot of artists on Death Row who hadn't came out yet to actually get a shine. Artists that proteges and artists that Dre, Snoop, and Suge were working with. I mean, they put a lot of their own people on. They put a lot of their own people on when it came to this soundtrack. Artists that Suge was managing, like Jodeci and so forth. A lot of them appeared on this record, and Snoop in particular, man, this was probably the first time where he really started to put on a lot of people from his city, which was Eastside Long Beach. So there's a lot of cats from his own town that were given a great opportunity on this soundtrack. And as well as Dr. Dre was able to put on a lot of people that he had taken under his wing and that he was working with, and as well as artists that Suge was managing, and also artists that he was mentoring and so forth. It was an opportunity for all three of them to come together and to put together something really, really cool, and it turned out to be one of the best soundtracks of all time. Of course, you know, hip hop soundtrack is mainly composed of West Coast hip hop, on R&B, gangster rap, and even a little bit of horrorcore. But I just always really enjoyed this soundtrack. Even the first time I heard it in full was back in 2001 when the remastered versions were released, and I remember just digging it so much. It was actually one of the first soundtracks that I actually enjoyed, because I've never really been that big of a soundtrack guy, but there's always been particular ones, especially when it comes to the 90s in hip hop, that always have stood out to me, and this is one of them. So let's get into some of the songs. Let's go. Well, not some of the songs. Let's get into all the songs. The first track is "Murder Was the Case," the remix. The original version appeared on, of course, Snoop's debut album, Doggystyle. Personally, I prefer the original version that was on Doggystyle. That's just my own personal preference. I like that one better. But the remix is fire. The remix is fire. This was the one that got released as a single. Had a really cool music video that went along with it, as well as, if you watch the short film actually kind of acts more like an extended version of the music video, with a plot and everything surrounding. Not too different from what Michael Jackson used to do with his videos back in the day. But really dig this song. The remix is more, I would say the remix is more spookier and eerie sounding, definitely more in vein of horrorcore. That was the style that was a style that was relatively popular around this time. So yeah, the remix is more in that vein. So there's a lot more eerie synths and kind of evil sounds and stuff like that surround this track that make it a lot more scarier than opposed to the original. But I still prefer that original one on Doggystyle better. But a dope track. Next song is "Natural Born Killers," and this one is performed by Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg. Excuse me, not Snoop Dogg, Ice Cube. Dr. Dre and Ice Cube. This was big. This was really huge back in '94, because if I'm correct, this was the first time that Dre and Cube actually had collaborated since the days of NWA. And excuse me, let me fix this light here a little bit. Oops, sorry. But yeah, this was the first time that they had actually collaborated since the days of NWA. And I gotta tell you, man, they take this song to a whole nother level. I mean, if you thought that "Murder Was the Case" was scary, man, this song, they just turn it up several notches. I mean, the synths just get so much louder and more evil sounding, and you got Dre and Cube trading back different like bars about committing extreme acts of violence, and then you got all these like these additional vocals that just enhance the horrorcoreness of this particular song. It's one of the hardest tracks on the album. Actually, I would say it is the hardest track on this soundtrack. But one thing I wanted to point out was the introduction to this song. There's a part where it's a woman and a man. They're walking home. They're actually walking home through a rough neighborhood. They're walking home through a rough neighborhood, and the man is clearly Dr. Dre. I don't know who the woman is performing. It might have been Jewel, but they're walking home in a rough neighborhood. You can hear some music playing in the background, and both of them are talking about like, let's hurry up and get home. I hate this neighborhood, and so forth. And as they're walking, somebody from the neighborhood, where I assume is probably like one of the local gangbangers, he starts harassing them. And then the man turns around and is like, yo, why you messing with me? And the dude says, man, F you, man, because I can. And you hear a gunshot. And that's when the song kicks in. But I just want to point that out, because I feel like it may not have been that deep in the context of the song, but I thought it was interesting, because it really goes to show that not everybody that lives in these rough environments are partaking in the activities that go on in these areas. There's a lot of people that live in these areas that they feel unsafe just as much as somebody who was an outsider and might have taken a wrong turn. You know, I just wanted to point that out. But one of the best songs on the record, honestly. Next track is "What Would You Do?" And this one is performed by the Dogg Pound. And it also features Snoop Dogg and Jewel on the hook. This is one of my favorite songs by the Dogg Pound. I think it's one of their best songs. Uh, and honestly, this was a breakout hit for the Dog Pound because What Would You Do was actually released as a single. And if I'm correct, they actually got a Grammy nomination for this song. I don't think they won it, but still, the fact that a gangster rap song was Grammy nominated in the early '90s, that's huge within itself. But man, this is definitely one of their best tracks. I think it's one of the best songs produced by Daz. I mean, he he creates this bouncy G-funk track that's clearly made for the lowriders. Cause every time I hear this song, that's all I can think about is like some dudes from the hood just riding through like the streets of LA and a lowrider just bouncing with the beat. And it's mainly a diss track. It's mainly a diss track towards Ruthless Records because around '94 the whole Ruthless Death Row thing was still happening. You know, not too long ago, Eazy-E had actually responded to Dr. Dre's disses on the Chronic with Real Compton City G's, which featured BG Knockout and Gangsta Drayster. And there's a few disses that go towards BG Knockout and Drayster and Ruthless Records as well on this song. But this track was a huge hit, man. And I think this was what really led to the Dog Pound ended up putting out their album Dog Food a year later. But one of the best tracks on the album, one of my favorites from the Dog Pound. Next on here is 21 Jump Street, and this one is performed by Snoop and Trey D, Big Trey D of the East Siders. This song and this soundtrack, this was the world's introduction to Trey D. And again, this goes along with what I was saying earlier when I first started the video about that Snoop Dogg took the opportunity to put on a lot of people from his city, Eastside Long Beach, on this soundtrack. And Trey D was one of them. But 21 Jump Street, this is another joint produced by Daz. Another great one from Daz, a very smooth, laid-back G-Funk beat. And it's a dedication to 21st Street in Eastside Long Beach, where Snoop and Trey D are from. And the way that they just trade back their verses and their bars with each other, just representing it and dedicating it to the block that they grew up on, man, it really showed a really nice chemistry between the two of them. But everybody that I know that was of age back when this soundtrack came out and they owned it back then, they always talk about how 21 Jump Street was one of their favorites on the soundtrack. It was one of their favorite songs to ride to. And I remember when I first had this soundtrack, that's what a lot of the older homies used to tell me, like, yeah, that 21 Jump Street, that was always my joint back then when this soundtrack came out. But it's definitely one of the biggest highlights on this soundtrack. Next song, and this is another favorite of mine, and it's another huge highlight, is One More Day, performed by Nate Dogg, the late great Nate Dogg. This song in particular, man, something, Nate Dogg is always, I know people give Nate Dogg his respect, man, but people always kind of regulate him as like the hook guy, the hook singer and everything. And rightfully so. I mean, Nate Dogg laced a lot of hooks when he was alive, but he was also a really great singer that could carry a whole entire song. And this is one of the best examples of that. One More Day, that's another fan favorite from this soundtrack. It's gangster, it's G-Funk, but it also has a soulful and gospel element to it as well. And Nate Dogg, his voice is just, he just laces this track where he's telling his life story about growing up, and at the end just being thankful that he was able to see one more day, because he talks about growing up and witnessing like a big homie getting murdered from trying to rob a store, and him getting into the dope game, and him getting locked up, and him worried about his child and everything like that. He talks about his life growing up and where to the point where he is today. So I thought that was a real dope song, and another one of the big highlights from this soundtrack. Next track is Harvest for the World, and this one is performed by Jewel and produced by Dr. Dre. This is actually a cover. This is actually an Isley Brothers cover. And Jewel, R.I.P. to Jewel, she passed away, about 2 or 3 years ago. Jewel, man, it's a shame that she didn't get to come out with an album while she was on death row, because she was a great singer, very remarkable voice, and her powerful vocals really just takes this song to another level. She really does a thing. Dr. Dre, he produces the song, he makes a few appearances on here. He doesn't rap or anything, he just kind of speaks and everything like that. One thing is funny though is that when the song ends, Dre, he comes on and says, "All right, Jewel, that was good, but let him know that it's death row." and Jewel she yells out "biatch," which was pretty funny. I thought that was pretty cool. All right, next track is "Who Got Some Gangsta Shit," and this is performed by Snoop Dogg, the Dog Pound, and shoot, Lil C Style, Young Swoop. I mean, pretty much just the whole LBC posse cut right here. One of my favorites. I think I'm trying to remember. Hold on, let me check right quick. I'm thinking either Daz or Superfly produced this song. Oh, it was Superfly. Superfly produced this song. Yeah, and I forgot, man. The Superfly actually, see again, going along with Snoop Dogg putting on more people from his city on the soundtrack. Superfly was from Eastside Long Beach, and this soundtrack is where he really got his big break. But yeah, he produced one of my favorites on this track. His beat, man, it's just so laid back, definitely geared towards lowriders and just for the game bangers out on the streets and everything like that. He really hooked this song up, man. Everybody came hard on here. Snoop, Corrupt and Daz, Young Swoop, Lil C Style. Lil C Style though, he was the MVP of this track in my opinion. He had my best verses. His first verse on here, he opens up the song, I think. Yeah, he opens up the song. His verse is like a reworking of Ice-T 6 in the morning. He just alters he alters the lyrics to make it to come from a guy from Long Beach's perspective. But his second verse was the hardest. And I just found this out recently, but his second verse was actually a diss towards RBX. You know, RBX, that's Snoop Dogg's big cousin who was once signed to Death Row Records, and he was featured prominently on The Chronic. But about around this time, he had fell out with Suge and Dre, and he had left the label, and I guess there had been some tension back and forth between them. And Lil C Style, his whole second verse like goes at him, man, and it's hard. If you ever seen the documentary called The Show, one of the most popular scenes in that documentary was when they're on the bus with Snoop and the Dog Pound, and they start to like recite that verse in its entirety. That was one of the highlights of that documentary if you've never seen it. But this is one of my favorite tracks, man. I listen to this track so much, man. It's always one of my go-tos whenever I put on this soundtrack. All right, the next track is "Come When I Call," and this one is performed by Danny Boy. And if I'm correct, this soundtrack was probably Danny Boy's first appearance as a Death Row artist. It's a smooth R&B track, and of course Danny Boy, remarkable singer, still out there doing his thing. He laces it with his really extraordinary vocals. And you know what's so crazy about this is that Danny Boy was young. You know, I just found out recently. Honestly, the last few years actually, that he was only a teenager when all this was going on. I always thought that he was a grown man. I thought he might have been the same age as Snoop and all of them. But nah, he was a young dude. He was like 16 around this time. But the way he performed this song, man, you would have thought he was like 27 or 30 some years old, man. But he did his thing on this song. Definitely one of the best R&B tracks on here. Next track is "You Better Recognize," and this one is performed by Sam Snead and Dr. Dre. Sam Snead, he's a rap artist and producer. I think he started out with K Solo and the Hit Squad, but by this time he was actually working with Dr. Dre, so he was up under Dr. Dre at this point. And he was also signed to Death Row as an artist. And this was his musical debut, because his actual debut, I believe, was on Snoop's Doggystyle. If you remember the song called "Pump Pump," the last song on Doggystyle, there's a skit at the beginning where Snoop's talking to this woman, and then this dude comes up trying to beef with Snoop, and he says, "Man, my name is Sam Snead, you better recognize," which became a popular catchphrase around that time. That's Sam Snead, but this was his musical debut, "You Better Recognize," and this was also one of the singles that was released from this soundtrack. Had a cool video, although I think that music video for that song would lead to some controversy later on that I won't get into in this video. But this is one of the best songs on the record. And Sam Snead produced this track himself. He also was a co-producer on Natural Born Killers. And Natural Born Killer was actually a song originally that was based off a track he did called "The Heist" with somebody else. Can't think of it right now. But yeah, real dope track. "Come Up to My Room" is the next track. And this is Jodeci featuring the Dog Pound. I gotta tell you right now, "Come Up to My Room" is an underrated Jodeci classic. I hold this song right up there with all their well-known hits, like Come Talk to Me," "Baby Won't You Just Stay," you know, "Fiendin'," "Freaking You," All those classic Jodeci songs that we know, for those of us who grew up in that era, I hold Come Up to My Room right up there with them. This is such a great song. And this is another fan favorite amongst a lot of people who have this soundtrack or who once owned this soundtrack. Um, like the Dog Pounds, I mean the Dog Pounds appearance on here is really cool. Daz doesn't really have much. I think Daz actually co-produced this song with Devontae, if I remember. But he has a brief appearance. Mainly Corrupt handles the verse. He spits one verse that's really cool. But man, Jodeci, man, they just annihilated this track, man. This is one of the best '90s R&B songs ever. If you ain't never listened to Come Up to My Room, you definitely need to go check this out. It's one of Jodeci's greatest songs, in my opinion. All right, next song is Woman to Woman, and this is another one performed by Jewel. Now, I always thought that this was a cover song for some reason, but I couldn't find any information of it being a cover song. But I think the reason why I thought that is because this song is very soulful. It's a lot in line with like 70s soul music. And I like that the spoken introduction that Jewel does, because this song is apparently about her confronting a woman that's, like, I guess having an affair with her man, and she's telling that woman that she ain't gonna give him up so easy and so forth. It just kind of reminded me of a lot of those early like 70s soul songs that kind of had that similar format. And it also has live instrumentation. And of course, Jewel, she was a remarkable singer. She really does her thing on this joint, man. But real great song. So after this, we get to another one of my favorite tracks on this soundtrack, and this is Dollars and Cents, performed by DJ Quick. DJ Quick was being managed by Suge Knight at the time, so that's why he also appears on here, and he also produces or co-produces a few other songs on here. But man, Dollars and Cents, when people talk about the greatest diss tracks of all time, sometimes I feel like Dollars and Cents gets left out the conversation, and it's honestly one of the best diss tracks of all time. Now this song, when it came out, this is 94, so the whole DJ Quick and MC8 beef was still at its height. They had been trading disses back and forth on their albums. Like I think the first shot that 8 did was it on Straight Checking Them? Maybe might have been Straight Checking Them, or it was Music to Drive By. But then Quick shot back on Way Too Funky and various soundtracks and stuff like that, and compilations. They were dropping diss tracks. And for a long time, man, it was even. I always thought it was kind of even. Like, one song A to get Quick, and then the next song Quick could get A. But honestly, man, when Dollars and Cents came out, when Quick dropped this song, he turned the tide, man. The ball was in his court. And listen, I love MC8. I'm a fan of Compton's Most Wanted. Got a few of their albums, but honestly, man, DJ Quick won. He won with this Dollars and Cents, man. I mean, he pretty much just broke 8 apart. He broke 8 apart with that track. And we all know that last verse has some, what is now considered some suspect lyrics. I'm not going to repeat those lyrics. You can listen to the song for yourself and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But still, man, it's one of the greatest diss tracks of all time. And I think it's one of DJ Quick's best songs, especially from a production standpoint. I mean, he really did his thing on the production tip with that track. But, and like I said, man, I'm sorry. I respect MC8. I'm a fan of MC8, but Quick won it with the Dollars and Cents. Because 8 he responded back on his next album, Death Threats, man. But I mean, his responses didn't outweigh with Dollars and Cents. Sorry. So the next track is The Eulogy. This is The Eulogy. This is performed by CPO, Boss Hogg, and Slip Capone. This is another one of my favorite tracks, man. This is a very like eerie and spooky track as well. I guess it's like more of like a cautionary tale about getting caught up in the street life and so forth. But RIP to CPO, Boss Hogg, and Slip Capone, because both of them are no longer with us now. I think Slip Capone passed away probably about 10 years ago now, and CPO, Boss Hogg, he passed away like 2 or 3 years ago, I believe. I actually followed him on Instagram, and he actually commented on one of my posts. But my favorite verse is CPO's last verse, where he talks about, him he having to take out his homie because his homie tried to betray him. I'm not saying that's a true story. I'm sure it's a fictional story. It's just in the context of the story that's been told. But his part's talking about taking out one of his homies because they like trying to steal money from him, and when he confronts him about it, the dude kind of gets hostile with him and he has to take him out. That was one of my favorite parts, because to me it was like a cautionary tale of what happens when you get caught up in that type of lifestyle. And Slip Capone, he comes in, he kind of talks for a little bit, and he pretty much sums it up as what I just said. But it's a dope song. Then the next track is another R&B track called Horny, performed by B Rizal. B Rizal. Now I'm not too sure who he is. I think he might have been an R&B singer that was signed to Death Row. He might have been. I saw an interview of his pop up on YouTube that I might need to watch. But he also appeared on the Above the Rim soundtrack as well. So I don't know if he was signed to Death Row and he never came out with anything aside from the songs he did on the soundtracks, or he was just somebody that was affiliated with them. But yeah, the song Horny, the title speaks for itself. You know, a very explicit R&B song. You know, B Rizal basically he just singing and explaining to his woman how he's gonna pleasure her. That's basically it. And he ain't holding nothing back. He ain't holding nothing back either when he talks about how he's gonna pleasure his woman. But it's a dope R&B track nonetheless, man. And the last song on here is East Side West Side, performed by the Young Soldiers, which I believe the Young Soldiers, they from Watts. And I think some of them actually appeared on the Bloods and Crips album that came out probably around this year or the year prior, in 1993 or 94. I forget what year that album came out. But yeah, this is one of my favorite tracks on this album. But interesting enough though, that song, sonically it sounds different compared to the other tracks on here, because most of the songs on here are in the vein of like G-Funk and, you know, R&B, more melodic. Even the harder songs, there's still some melody to it, but this one is a more rough and raw, and more, yeah, it just, it's West Coast, but it just doesn't have a G-Funk style to it like everything else on here. So when I first heard East Side West Side, it almost kind of sounded like a bonus track, as opposed to like really fitting into the context of the soundtrack. But it's still a dope song. I still like it. I mean, I especially like the gang vocals that's shouted throughout, especially during the chorus and then some of the bridge parts. But it's a hard track, man. I really dig it. It's one of the more harder songs on this soundtrack. But yeah, Murder Was the Case, the soundtrack by Snoop Dogg. Yeah, this is one of the best soundtracks of all time. And you know, some people have their feelings about this soundtrack, mainly because, you know, it came out during a high profile murder case that Snoop was facing. And, you know, a lot of critics, a lot of people looked at it as, man, Snoop capitalizing off of something that was bad, which I guess honestly you could say that's what it was. But it was one of the best soundtracks of the 90s, man. One of the best soundtracks. I almost enjoyed this as much as I enjoyed Snoop Dogg's albums during this era. That's how good this soundtrack is. I enjoy it like it's a studio album. And sometimes I look at it as more than just a soundtrack, or per se. I kind of look at it as more of like a Death Row Records compilation, in a sense, because there was a lot of people on here that got put on through this soundtrack. And, you know, Snoop put on a lot more of his people from Long Beach, you know, that may not have gotten that same kind of look anywhere else. It was, as well as Dre and Suge. That's kind of how I look at it, man. But, you know, Reggie Wright Jr. always says that Suge Knight is a marketing genius, and I think this is one of the many ideas that he had that actually paid off, because this became one of the few hip hop soundtracks that actually was successful, and it contributed to the success of Death Row. And I'm not sure when the Above the Rim soundtrack came out. I want to say the Above the Rim soundtrack either came out before or after, but that was also another successful soundtrack that Death Row put out that contributed to their more success in the industry at the time. But yeah, one of the dopest soundtracks of all time. A huge part of Snoop Dogg's discography in his career, so definitely check it out. And since Snoop Dogg has put back all the Death Row Records albums, the music back on streaming platforms, you can go on Spotify or Apple Music or wherever you stream your music. You can actually listen to this soundtrack. Definitely one of the dopest soundtracks of all time. Really like the album cover and everything like that. And this is a first pressing. This is a first pressing too. And I wanted to show something right quick before I end the video. because this what I'm about to show you wasn't in the 2001 version, but yeah, this came in. This came with the original pressing. It's a little insert that it's like a picture of Dr. Dre. Murder was the case. He's sitting in the director chair because Dr. Dre actually directed the movie, the short film. And then on the back right here, it has like the credits to the film and everything like that. It's got everybody's credits and everything like that. I thought that was real cool because, you know, the reissue didn't have that. It didn't include that. But yeah, that's it for this album review or this soundtrack review. Snoop Doggy Dogg, Death Row, Murder Was the Case. Hope you all enjoyed this album review. If you did enjoy this album review, just do me a huge favor. Hit that thumbs up and give me a like. Share the video because it helps the channel. Also, be sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop new content. And I want to give a huge thank you to everybody that's been subscribing to the channel. Everybody that's been watching the video, supporting, leaving comments, positive comments. I really do appreciate it. And as always, hope everybody has a blessed day, a blessed week. And love, peace, and music. Peace out, y'all.